Welcome, everybody, to yet another episode of the Shadows Podcast. I'm your host, Trip Bodenheimer, and today I'm excited to have with us Joel Goldberg. He is 25 years in television, developing and maintaining relationships with professional athletes, coaches, team management. He's a member of the Kansas City Royals broadcast team, keynote speaker, author of Small Ball, Big Results. He's got a podcast, Rounding the Bases, and this is the one that stands out most to me. He's an amazing storyteller if you get a chance to listen to him. So, Joel, thank you so much for taking time to be here on the Shadows Podcast.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me, Trip.
Yeah. How's everything in Kansas City?
Everything is good. We're probably like any other place in the country that doesn't have hot or warm weather, that you never know this time of year. And as we're recording, it's January. It could be warm. It could be cold. It could be warm one day and snowing the next day. So, that's pretty much it. And a pandemic and all that good stuff. But other than that, you know what, hanging in there, and really, really grateful to have survived 2020. And I know a lot of people didn't, but I'm excited about this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to get things started first with a couple of our rapid fire questions. You have no idea which questions are being thrown at you. So
I have no idea. I can't wait.
So first one, what is the most embarrassing on-air moment you've had in your career?
Oh, this one's easy. And this was a nightmare. And I'm fortunate enough that I've never, dropped any F-bombs or anything like that. So that's good. I've been in the middle of an interview when an F-bomb was dropped, and that you got to navigate through. But back in 2009, and this one, this one wore me for a lot of years. I think it's funny now, but 2009, we had at Kauffman Stadium in Kansas City. It was my second year, and they had renovated the stadium. So, had all kinds of new food and this and that. So they were really wanting me, producers and all that, to go out there and do a lot of scenery from the ballpark and showing it off and the different food and the this and that. And so my producer before the game says, "Hey, are you familiar with Guy Fieri, the famous chef?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, I don't, not really. My wife watches a lot of those shows, so I've seen it on, but I don't really know much about him." But he's like, "Well, he's here." And I talked to him because I saw him, coming into the stadium, and he said, I asked him if he'd be willing to be interviewed during the game, and he said, "Yeah, so are you willing to do it?" I said, "Yeah, sure, cool." So I get out there like the middle of the game, and they're like, whatever it was, okay, fourth inning, you're going to go to, and this is the seat he's in. So I get down there, and I sit down, I'm like, "Hey, nice to meet you." He's like, "Good to meet you. Can you do this?" "Yeah, sure." So they come to me live, and I'm interviewing him, and it's just like nothing feels right. Like he's kind of squirrely, like, and I've never really watched his show, but I know enough to know that you don't have some kind of famous cooking show without a big personality, which of course he does. And this guy was like kind of introverted, kind of felt off, felt uncomfortable.
No chemistry.
Short answers.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, this is, and I finally just ended the interview. I'm like, I don't know if that's him. And it wasn't. It was an imposter.
Oh my God.
And I think social media had at least started where, it had. I think Twitter was the thing at that point where, I got just crushed. And for years, if I'd get in an argument with someone on Twitter about the team, which I don't do a whole lot of anymore, that like the default to someone that couldn't argue logistics or like true stuff was, "What about Guy Fieri?" I'm like, okay.
Oh, that was their go-to.
And I will tell you that our crew, and it only been my second year with them, and I've been with them now 13 years. Our crew was so pissed off, like they wanted to hunt this guy down and hurt him, because they were so upset that he would put not just me, but all of us in an embarrassing spot like that. And apparently this guy, literally, I guess, he likes to be an imposter and show up at things in town because you get free food and things like that. And nobody ever really called him on it. We never saw him again. So that was an embarrassing one. And I will say it took me a while to shake it, because I'm like, wait, that's all you got? Like that, of all the work I've done, 5 years later, and that's what you're going to mention? But, people remember stuff like that. And there are a lot worse things that could happen. But it got my guard up to remember that, you got to, and there's something too in leadership here that I didn't set it up. I didn't ask for it. But you know what? Good or bad, I'm the one that's front and center. So it's my reputation.
Yeah.
I never held it against my producer. I mean, for him, it was just like, oh man, I'm sorry I messed up. But he could go to bed that night. I'm the one that had to think about it. But nobody was hurt. Everything was fine. Nobody got fired. Nobody, I think for everybody else, it was a good laugh, but it was at my expense.
That is a very good point you brought up, that most people, I think even myself at certain points in my life, I would have gone up to the producer and finger pointed and blame them for the whole thing. But you're right. It's like just own up to it.
Yeah.
What is something in your life that you really appreciate that most people don't?
I think I mean, there are a lot of things, it'd be very easy to talk about family and all that. But as someone that asks these questions and tries to steer people away from their family, not that it's not important, just, I always want people to learn. Like, hopefully we all love our wives. We all love our kids. Those are our biggest moments. But I think for me, it would be, I think I just appreciate the fact that I have a platform to make a difference in people's lives. And I didn't, we may talk about this more later, but I didn't sign up to be on TV to make an impact in people's lives. I signed up to be on TV because it was my dream to talk about sports. And so I think what I appreciate really every single day is, whether it be through podcast, TV, anything on social media, is that I actually have a chance to make an impact in a stranger's life at any moment.
Yeah.
And I don't view myself as that way. I mean, I understand it. And so that's a privilege. That's something that, you don't really advertise, or it's not on a resume. But I think that's a pretty big responsibility of understanding that anywhere at any point in the world, I might actually have a chance to make someone's life better. That's something that I try to think about every day.
That's good. One place you want to visit before you die?
So many. I'd like to disappear to like an island for years before I die would really be good. But I think if I had to pick one, I'd like to go to Israel, and I think that'll happen at some point. I don't know when. I think that'd be, obviously a sacred place and a very meaningful place. I think that I'd go with that.
Okay. And favorite book that you, outside of yours, we'll get to yours, outside of your book, favorite book you would recommend to somebody?
I'll give you two. That's always a hard question, but I think the book that I enjoyed a lot last year was Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game. And I think that, one, I had the opportunity to interview him this year. And so I'm a huge fan of his work, but I just think there's something about that book, and I don't need to summarize the whole thing, but in sports, we kind of play the finite game. There's a winner and there's a loser. The infinite game is, and it can apply to sports too, is that long-term culture that you're building. It's more than just the wins and losses. For companies and business, it's, he writes about how, Circuit City or Blockbuster was the thing, and they might have been number one until they weren't, right?
Yeah.
Like, the game doesn't go on forever. But what companies know how to take care of their people? What companies are more invested in the big picture versus today? So I love that book in terms of recent reads. The book that is my favorite sort of go-to book for a pick-me-up, which I've read a few times, is a book called The Soul of Baseball. And I actually don't read as many sports books as people would think.
Yeah.
But The Soul of Baseball is written by a friend of mine, Joe Posnanski. He wrote it when he wrote it, I didn't even know him. He wrote it a couple of years before I came to Kansas City. He was originally a columnist here, or used to be a columnist here. He's out of Charlotte now, does a lot of national work, written a ton of books. Soul of Baseball, he spent a full year traveling around with the late Buck O'Neill, legendary Negro Leagues player and manager. And it is as much a book about life and perspective as it is about baseball or his journey. And it's just one of those books, very much what I try to do, and I'm not at his level in terms of writing and speaking, is I don't ever want it just to be about baseball. I want it
Yeah.
to be about, you mentioned storytelling. I want it to be about impactful storytelling that you feel. And he captures that as well as anyone. I never had the chance to meet Buck O'Neill, who, I have like multiple bobbleheads of his,
Yeah.
and the Negro Leagues just thrived here in Kansas City, among other places. But this was the hub. This is where the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, which Buck O'Neill created, they've got a streetcar now in Kansas City with his image on it and the number 22. And I mean, there's so much. I never met the man, but I feel like I know the man in part because of that book.
Mm.
And I feel like I'm always able to get fresh, good, uplifting perspective. And when I'm down, I can pick that book up and read it. So Soul of Baseball by Joe Posnanski to me is it sits on my nightstand, 365 days a year.
Okay. Yeah. We'll have that book and your book on our social media accounts as one of the weekly reads. So paint a picture for the audience as to, like your childhood, Joel Goldberg growing up. What was your childhood like?
Good childhood, middle class, grew up outside of Philadelphia on the New Jersey side until I was 13. Didn't really know, anything else in the world existed because my parents had both been born in North Jersey. They ended up down in South Jersey after they got married, and I was born there. Born in the same town, Willingboro, New Jersey, as Carl Lewis, a little bit after him. I mean, he's older than me. And so but that was always sort of the claim to fame. But grew up in a town near there, about 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia. Die-hard sports fan, anything Philadelphia, Eagles, Phillies, Flyers, Sixers, Villanova basketball, and that's all I cared about. I was a mediocre athlete at best. That's putting it mildly. I loved playing everything, like any kid that grew up in the 70s, mostly 80s, I guess, when I was born early 70s. Outside every day after school, outside every day of the summer. It could be, it could be tackle football, it could be street hockey, it could be basketball, whatever it was. We moved to Chicago when I was 13. My dad had a job transfer. It's weird because we had no exposure. Certainly, I didn't, to anywhere but the East Coast. And I only think of myself as a Midwesterner now. I've been in the Midwest for over 35 years, and same thing there. I mean, end of junior high and then high school in Chicago, and that's really where the roots and everything settled for us. And still a mediocre athlete, always a decent student, probably could be better, but decent. And knew very early on that even if I was dreaming of hitting game-winning home runs in Game 7 of the World Series, like a lot of kids in the backyard playing wiffle ball
Yeah.
and all that stuff, that I wanted to be the guy talking about it. And I don't know
Mm.
what age that started. It may have been as early as 7 or 8 years old. But good childhood, good parents that taught us really how to treat everyone well, how to work hard. We ended up moving to a town in Chicago with a lot of wealth. We weren't the ones with the wealth. We were middle class, but they really taught me how to just work hard every single day.
Yeah.
And that really paid off in the TV career, because this is a career that most people give up on before it starts or early on, because there's no money. You're in small towns, and very much like the lower levels of minor league baseball. And I was just going to work my way through it.
I think my answer, you sparked something with me. That question I asked you for the rapid fire about something that you appreciate that most people don't. Mine would be playing outside as a kid.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And now I
Yeah.
feel like that's,
Nobody does it anymore.
exactly. Yeah. You go outside for, 20 minutes and you got to get back in and get on your phone. Phone's got to charge.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
So you talked about your upbringing. You brought up something that really made me like connect with you. I've heard some of your podcasts and read about you, and you talked about how at a young age you wanted to be like, the Sports Center anchor. You wanted to work with sports as a broadcaster. I was kind of the same way. I was the one in the driveway. I got fouled last second of the Final Four,
Yeah.
taking the shots. I would miss like 10 of them and keep getting fouled on the rebound, but then it was like, I think broadcasting's, something I really want to do. So on career day, like I think it was my 5th grade year, I made a little mic, went to school. I was the Sports Center announcer. When did that start becoming kind of a reality for you?
I don't know. A couple of thoughts here. One, I remember, and I can isolate it to first or second grade because my first grade teacher moved up with us to second grade. So I don't know if it was first or second grade, but I just can remember some version of that teacher, Mrs. Dunwoody, telling my parents or me, like, essentially that I was just driving her crazy with all the updates on the games the night before. So I know early on, I mean, I remember that. I don't know who it was said to, and she was my favorite teacher. But I from that point on had to go in, and I mean, obviously we didn't have internet and cell phones or any of that right then. You got everything out of the newspaper or
Yeah.
whatever you saw in the news or whatever you watched before you went to bed or listen on the radio. And so I had to come in and let everybody know about that. So I remember that. I remember once we got to Chicago, being up in the attic where we had a TV and turning the volume down on hockey games and calling those games. And I remember even like my senior year of high school, I would keep a binder of any time I watched a college basketball team. And I've had no scouting background and still don't, but I would usually write down on loose leaf paper that I put in the binder the name of the team. So the whole binder was alphabetized, and so if I was watching Georgia Tech, then there'd be a little write up on who their starters were and Kenny Smith and and if it was UNLV, it'd be about Larry Johnson and Stacey Augmon and I'd have these write ups on every single team, just my impressions or who their starters were and who their key players off the bench were. And so I think I knew more about college basketball then than I've ever known in my life. And so
Yeah.
I was doing it not to get a job. I was doing it because I enjoyed it. And so I think some of those pieces were being put in place. So for sure, in high school and taking a couple of the TV classes, the low level TV classes that we had, it was very much a reality at that point for me, even if I didn't know what it looked like or how it would turn out.
It's funny because I don't think like our younger audience probably realizes like what it was like to read the newspaper the next day to find out if your team won or lost or not having the
Well,
highlights available.
I mean, I don't even tell my son's 17, he's almost 18 now, and I don't even tell him anything that happened because he has the update and he has notification for everything else. I'm always telling him, turn off some of the notifications. It's better for your brain, it's better for your cell phone battery. But
Stress.
there's stress. There's no point in me updating him on anything because he already has it this moment. So I
Yeah.
do think that generation, like this generation, probably doesn't have that ability to play reporter the way I did, which might have a little something to do with,
Mm.
I think, why less people want to play reporter now. And, some of that is that why do you want to go on the news when you could potentially be a digital media reporter that's seen on Snapchat or all these other places? But that was our time. That, you,
Yeah.
if you wanted to be on TV and you wanted to be in sports, there were really two routes to go if you want to go on TV. You go the local news route, be the main sports guy or one of the sports reporters, or you go something like the Sports Center, or Sports Center route, or you go into play-by-play. And I went into the sports reporter, sports anchor route. But now I think that there's so many other choices.
Yeah, you're right. Social media, Gamecast on
All of it.
ESPN. Yeah, absolutely. So you ended up going to college, University of Wisconsin.
Mhm.
What was that experience like for you?
The best. I mean, I certainly did, like almost anybody that goes there, my share of partying. There's a reason why that school is always labeled one of the top, if not number one, always in the top 10 in the country. The cool thing about Wisconsin, a lot of cool things, is it's a really good school. So it's not just like, the place to go and party. It's it's a great education. It's gotten a lot more difficult. I love the fact that now if I tell people I went to Wisconsin and if they look at what it takes to get in there, they must think I'm smarter than I am because back then it was a good school and you had to have decent grades to get in. Probably a 3 something could get you in there. But now, I mean, they've just raised their game. I assume because it's become such a popular place to be, and it always was, but they just raised their standards. I mean, it's a really, really difficult place to get in. But beyond the obvious, the partying and this and that, it's one of the most gorgeous campuses in the country. Won't compete in terms of that with the warm weather places. However, if you're there in the summer, it's as good a place as there is in the country. I mean, it is. Well, it's one of my favorite cities in the world, but you're on an isthmus and you're in between two big lakes, and wedged in between that is a downtown in a big area, bustling with restaurants and bars, butted up on one end by the state capitol and government, and butted up on the other end by the university and everything that's fun in the middle. And hills and lakes and amazing people, down to earth people. So it was a great 4 years. I mean, it's the type of school that if anyone's looking for a small school experience, that's not it. I mean, I think it took till my junior and senior year till I was ever in classes that were small. I mean, lecture halls with hundreds of people and all that kind of stuff. But, same thing as high school, good student, probably could have done better, could have done a lot worse. But, I like any of us, I guess, that are old now, I'd kill to go back and live that again, because it was such a carefree time. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And I was sort of able to have fun, get my grades, and start to pursue that TV career all at the same time.
It's interesting because if you look at a lot of the guys on ESPN and you look at getting their degree in journalism, usually Syracuse is like the school. What made you go to Wisconsin?
Well, and it's a great question, because I feel like, that usually points towards Syracuse. Not that that's the only place, but you're right. And I knew you were going to say that as you were saying usually. This is an interesting one too, Trip, because I know I made the right choice, but I applied to 3 schools coming out of high school. And I don't know why I didn't apply to more. I remember I had a guidance counselor. There's a message here too, that like most of the kids in my school went to Illinois if that was the top choice. So I was going to apply there because, that's where you go, and in-state and all that. And I remember the guidance counselor told me that I didn't have good enough grades to get in there, so don't bother. So, to this day, that kind of sits with me, because why would you ever tell a kid not to try? There's a message there. However, I feel like because of that, I ended up being steered away from a place and going somewhere that I was happier anyway. I applied to Wisconsin, Indiana, and Missouri. I applied to Wisconsin because I had some friends that went up there, and I visited it my senior year, and I absolutely fell in love with the place. Send a high school kid up there for a weekend of partying, and you think it's the greatest place in the world. And I mean, I hate to say that, but I had the grades to get in there. I knew I was going to have a good time, and it ended up being the most amazing experience and a great education. So it worked out. If not for the right reason to start, it worked out. Second choice was Indiana. Actually, my wife ended up going there. We didn't know each other at the time. I don't remember why I applied to Indiana, but I know that we had a family sort of distant relative that was there. And when I visited Indiana, I was a freshman. He was a senior. He had a lot of that stuff out of his system. So I was hanging with a bunch of old guys, 4 years older than me. I wasn't a freshman. I was a senior in high school, and they were seniors in college. So, I didn't have the same experience there. I love Indiana though. And then I applied to Mizzou because that was the one that had the journalism school. And that was the one, this is what I wrestled with. That was one where I said, well, they have one of the best J schools in the country. I mean, they're at a Syracuse level in terms of the people that come through there. That would probably be right after Syracuse. And when I explored it, they said, well, you won't find out whether you get into the J school or not till you're a junior. And I had no idea whether I would or I wouldn't. And I just sort of made the decision. I'm like, you know what? If there are no guarantees, let me just go to the place that I'm the most excited about. And that ended up being Wisconsin. But I will tell you that I would say my sophomore year. So I had a good buddy that I worked some jobs with in the summer, high school, early into college, named Mark Silverman. He's arguably the top sports talk show host in Chicago. Certainly one of the best and most well known, and he's become an institution in Chicago. He was a year ahead of me, different high school, and he went to Southern Illinois, which also has a very good broadcasting people. People may not know about that as much nationally, but as I watched him and his trajectory, and I watched mine, I really wasn't able to do the things that I wanted to do in TV with the size of Wisconsin until my junior year, ironically. And he was on TV and radio from freshman year, sophomore year, doing everything. And there were moments where I'm like, maybe I should just transfer there. Like I'd never even been there before. And it all worked out. I didn't, by my junior year, I got a internship with the local NBC TV station. Supposed to only do one semester. They kept me on for 4 semesters because they liked me, I guess, and sort of broke the rules in doing that. And I kind of found a home, and it all worked out. But I very easily could have ended up in Illinois if I'd had different guidance. I could have ended up switching over to Southern Illinois. I never applied to Syracuse. I don't know if I don't remember why or whatnot, but it all worked. It just and it's not that Wisconsin is a bad J school. It's got a good J school, but they didn't have the history of producing TV people like some of the others did. And but I think that there's a reminder too, like you don't have to go to that specific school or have that specific major. Follow and pursue your dream and see where it takes you.
And when you started off, you mentioned NBC. Was it NBC 15 WMTV? Is that where you got your break?
No, my first break came before that, but sort of. So WMTV, which I know always sounded weird, that was like in the day, the heyday of MTV too. I don't even know how many people watch MTV anymore, but we were certainly watching it for the videos and then for Beavis and Butthead and all that kind of stuff. But WMTV was the NBC affiliate. That's where I had my internship. And so, I did 2 years of an internship there. As they gave me a little bit more responsibility beyond holding a clipboard and logging plays, I would edit a lot of the highlights for the news. I would go out and collect sound bites and do some of those interviews. I was never on camera there, but the best thing about that, along with getting the experience, was I made connections and I started to get to know these people, and they became mentors and friends. So when I got out of school, one, they didn't have an opening. Two, they weren't, certainly not for a competitive sports department. They weren't going to take somebody fresh out of school, even if they knew me. And so my first job was in a town named Rhinelander, Wisconsin, which is about a 3.5-hour drive north of Madison. So you're talking about 45 minutes, maybe an hour from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Extreme cold weather. I mean, made Madison look like nothing. And middle of nowhere. It's all relative. But it's the best job I ever had in many ways. I mean, the best job I have is what I've finally found here in Kansas City, 13 years in running. But in many ways, that was the best job I had. It gets back to being, going back to the innocent times again. But telling you, Trip, out of school, $13,500 a year. I started actually in news because that's what they had open. And then I went from news for 3 months, which I hated. And I'm a news junkie, but I didn't know how to break stories. I didn't know how to get sources. I could do it now, but I wasn't happy at all. And no, let me rephrase that. I was happy because I knew that I'd finally gotten in, but I wasn't where I wanted to be in terms of my role. And then after 3 months, they sort of made me the feature reporter / outdoor reporter, which sounds funny, but essentially they would have me drive all around within a 2-hour radius and find these, and we'd get mail with all these cool suggestions. Hey, we live in a small town and we live 4 doors down from our grandparents, and we have a dog that'll take lunch in a bag, and we put it in his mouth and he'll bring it all the way down the street and deliver it and then come back. Those are the stories that I was doing. They could have appeared on David Letterman or something like that. And I think back at that now, it was really truly my early days of storytelling. I mean, these were truly unique, interesting, bizarre, heartwarming stories. And even, from a military standpoint, I started building that reputation. I don't even know that I built a reputation, but the National Guard, the Wisconsin National Guard, approached our station or my boss and said, hey, we're going down to Panama for our basic training. We would be willing to pay, or I don't know if they paid or what, but would you want to come down for 2 weeks and take video and do stories on what we do? It was an engineering unit. So they asked me to do it. And so I went down there and did that. And so that was even before sports. But even from the moment I started in news and when I was doing those feature stories, and I think it was probably 6, 7, 8 months later when we had a guy left, a good friend of mine in sports, and I moved up into the sports department, I'd work my, 8 to 6:30 or whatever it was, 9 to 6:30, finish up with the 6 o'clock news with all the news stuff. And then I'd say to the sports department, hey, you got a high school game you want me to go shoot? And so I'd work, 12, 14-hour days every single day. One, just to sort of stay sharp on sports. Two, I had nothing else to do. I'm living in a small town by myself. And then work my way up to sports, then work my way to Madison. But yeah, $13,500 a month. And the first place I lived in was $300 a month in rent. I couldn't afford it. And so I ended up moving out and moving in with the director, our director on TV at the station, who looked like he could have been Garth from Wayne's World. And he and I split a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom place for a total of $340, so $170 a month in rent.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
1990. So I started in 94. That move to that apartment was probably in 95.
So 94, you were right there on like the cusp of Wisconsin football, kind of getting
Oh
over
yeah,
the.
no, I was. It's weird. Like I can't remember what happened yesterday, but I can remember things like this. My freshman year at Wisconsin was Barry Alvarez's first year,
Okay.
and they were terrible.
Yeah.
Laughing stock in the country. We went to games as a freshman for one reason and one reason only, and it was to party.
Yeah.
We weren't watching the game. We had one player really worth watching, and that was future NFL star Troy Vincent. And you can only get so excited about a defensive back, but he also returned punts, and that was really the only highlight we would have for the game. Otherwise, we were just screwing around in the stands. 1-10 my freshman year, I believe 5-6 my sophomore year, and 5-6 my junior year. A fumble late in the game at Northwestern. I had a good friend from high school at Northwestern, so I went down there like, we're finally going to a bowl game. We're going to beat Northwestern. We're going to be 6-5. And one of our star running backs, I think if I remember correctly, like fumbled on the goal line right before what would have given them the lead, and they ended up losing the game. Didn't go to the bowl game. And then my senior year, they went 9-1-1 and went to the Rose Bowl and beat UCLA. Yep. And that was the start of it. And then they've never been bad since. Their bad years are above 500 mediocre years, and their good years are Rose Bowl years. And so that started in 1994, and almost 20 years later, they're still going strong.
Yeah, and then the basketball team started to pick up some steam.
They weren't good when I was there either.
Yeah,
but they started to show signs because my senior year, there was a guy by the name of Michael Finley, and
yeah, that's right.
I will tell you that going to school, and I did, think about, for anyone that's a college basketball fan, and you got to be, closer to my age on this one. The Big Ten, while I was in college,
Fab Five
had the Fab Five, had the big dog Glenn Robinson, who was potentially better than all the rest of them. We had Michael Finley. Michigan State early in my college career had Steve Smith. Ohio State had Jimmy Jackson. I'm just naming some of them.
Calbert Chaney.
Calbert Chaney at Indiana.
Yeah.
The amount of guys that came through Wisconsin, and we weren't very good until my senior year, but to see these guys in person, and then oftentimes to be working those games as an intern and sitting down there on the floor was unbelievable. And, some of the personalities that came in too, Gene Cady and Judd Heathcote and always transfixed. I watched more of Bobby Knight than I did the game because it was just a show in itself. So it was a heyday in terms of talent for basketball.
That is my love, is like 80s, 90s, early 2000s college basketball. I could talk about it all day long. I could only imagine.
It was so good.
Then from there, well, actually, when did you meet your wife? Because you mentioned she was at Indiana when you were at Wisconsin. How did that work out?
Well, we both, it's interesting. Our families both moved to Chicago in 1985. Hers came from Kansas City. Mine came from the Philadelphia area. We never knew each other. We were at different high schools, so we wouldn't have crossed paths. But I worked at a summer camp one year. That's how I met that other guy I was talking about, Mark Silverman. And I worked with, so like home from college, and I worked with her sister, my wife's sister, so my sister-in-law. And she's a few years older, and so she was like a supervisor or something like that. And so we were camp counselors, and so she set me up with with her baby sister, and we went out on a blind date. And this is like, my wife's 2 years younger than me, so this is right before she's about to go to Indiana. I think I'm the coolest guy in the world, halfway through college. We did not click. That was the end of it. We're not talking social media and Facebook yet, so cell phones, not quite really. So just lost touch, and that was a one and done, not a great date. And a few years later, her senior year at Indiana, and I'm still working up in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. I come home I got, week and a half's vacation. And so I came home to hang out with the boys, all the high school friends. And Christmas Eve, 1995, that was a crazy day because now still having the Philadelphia roots, you could look it up. Christmas Eve, 1995, you will see that the Bears and Eagles played in a game at Soldier Field. And me and my dad and my brother went, and we did that during the day, went and hung out with my best high school friends that night. And then we went to a bar. It was like a Christmas Eve type of thing. And I bumped into her there. She was back home from Indiana. We met, started dating, and obviously the rest is history. And then the cool thing about it is that when we came here in 2008, her sister, the one that had set us up, had moved back to Kansas City, married a guy from Kansas City. And so we were always, I worked in St. Louis before here. We were always coming in to visit when my niece was born, when my nephew was born. Well, my niece was born before we were married, and then my nephew, we were married. So we were coming in all the time for the birth of kids, for holidays, coming in for Thanksgiving, things like that, driving across the strait. So when the job came open in Kansas City, it was like, man, this is like a second home to us anyway. And so it's sort of full circle for her because she grew up here till she was 11 years old. And now we've been here 13 years.
Before y'all ended up Kansas City, I had a couple of stops before that. But one thing I wanted to ask is when you were kind of finishing up in Wisconsin, explain to just a casual sports fan, how serious they take Packers football up there.
It's religion. I'll put it to you this way. I've never been to an Alabama football game, but I think it's probably that level in terms of intensity over a team from a whole state.
Yeah.
So outside of people that live on the border for Illinois or the border of Minnesota, you might have some Gopher fans on the Minnesota side, or not Gopher fans, Vikings fans. You definitely have a ton of Bears fans right along the border. No love lost there. I remember as a kid, if you lived, or when I got to Wisconsin, if you were on the border and you were a Bears fan, or if you were just in Illinois, they called you a fib, which is an effing Illinois bastard. And that was just like a term, oh, he's a fib. So but for the most part, beyond those borders, like this isn't okay. If you live in Green Bay, you go to the game. No, this is if you live in the state, you either are tuned in or you drive in for the game. I mean, people would make weekends of it. It was everything. The talk radio. I mean, if they lost, people were ready to jump off of a bridge. I mean, it's, I think the intensity of Chiefs fans here in Kansas City are among the best in football, but I've never seen anything like Green Bay. I say that the two most hallowed grounds that I have covered sports in, and I haven't been to all of them, never been to the Masters, and they're the three most. Sorry, Fenway Park, nothing like it in terms of baseball. Lambeau Field, nothing like it in terms of football, and Montreal for hockey. And unfortunately, I never got to the old Forum, but I think it's called the Bell Center. I get all those mixed up there, but probably 12 or so years ago, I did a St. Louis Blues game in Montreal, and I actually might put that experience over the rest of them. Yeah. But I mean, what Alabama football is like.
Oh yeah.
That's what Packer football. That's the best way for me to describe Packer football.
Yeah. Have you ever seen it was like a documentary, or there was a special in Sports Center or something, but it was a guy that lives in Green Bay and he's a Bears fan.
I haven't, but I mean, and they're up there.
He has no shame.
I remember doing a story maybe my first year or so in Rhinelander, and the beauty up there is that they call it the Northwoods up there. And so, Rhinelander is a town of 7,800 people, but when you start getting to all the neighboring towns, they're all spread out like 20 to 30 minutes apart. I mean, there's nothing on top of each other. You start getting into these little resort towns, on the little lakes and all that. And I don't know why, I remember doing a story up at a bar, at a resort. And it could have been straight out of, Saturday Night Live. The Bears fan up there looked like he could have been, doing the old Chris Farley or, pull a sausage thing. And then his buddy, it was either like that or Grumpy Old Men. And then his buddy was a Packers fan, and they were like, lifelong friends, sitting at the bar with beers in their hands, and they're jawing back and forth. And I don't know what the story was. The only reason why I remember that, I kind of picture them, I mean, this is 25 years ago, is that I was doing my on-camera stand-up, and I just couldn't get the words out that day. And I must have done 20 takes, and these guys were all over me. But it was classic, Packers, Bears rivalry. I mean, that is truly one of the best rivalries, especially when they're both good.
Yeah, that's like down here in Alabama. When Auburn beats Alabama, it's like it pumps a little life into it. But
when does that happen?
Not much. I think it hasn't happened since I've been here. I think they beat them in basketball. So from there, you end up in St. Louis, and you covered the greatest show on turf, didn't you?
I covered the greatest show on turf. I covered a lot of great things there. I mean, that was really the big break for me. But I'd say, the first break was just getting in Rhinelander, and then that took a lot to get in there. But third stop was St. Louis, and I think there's a message for everyone too about networking, connections, relationships. I mean, I mentioned before that my second job back at the station that I interned at, I got that because I'd gone out there and gotten experience, and I had the past relationships. When I moved into sports in Rhinelander, the guy that left, who's to this day a good friend of mine, his name is Martin Kilcoyne. He left being our top sports guy in Rhinelander, and he went to the CBS station in Madison. A year later, I get a job back at NBC in Madison. So we're competitors. We're hanging out, after the 10 o'clock news every single night, catching up, and then we're competing against each other during the day. He then gets, after a couple of years in 1997, a job with the Fox affiliate in St. Louis. A year later, they have an opening. He puts in a word for me. They fly me down. I get an interview. I get the job there. I jump in with him. My first day on the job was, I believe, September 29th, 1998. I'm pretty sure that date's right. The reason why I remember that was a Monday. If we look it up, I'm pretty sure I'm right. Sunday, the 28th, if the dates are right, was the day before I started working, was Mark McGwire's 69th and 70th home runs. So we get to town, my fiance at the time, on a Friday. My college roommate at Wisconsin for all 4 years was from St. Louis and was at that point a lawyer. I mean, he'd finished law school, and so he was practicing early in his career. His family had season tickets, so they brought us to the game that Friday. We get to St. Louis on a Friday, and we're at Busch Stadium Friday night watching McGwire, like I feel like it was 5th row, maybe it was 10th row, I don't remember. We're watching Mark McGwire hit his 66th home run, and this is when the whole nation was caught up every single day on McGwire Sosa. I mean, that's all we watched in Madison. She and I were living together in Madison. She had gotten a job up there, and we'd gotten engaged. And I just can remember every night, not being in a Major League Baseball town, that's all we watched, the home run race. Now we're like close to the field. We're watching number 66. He hit 67 and 68 on Saturday, hit 69 and 70 on Sunday. This is a great story. I went with my buddy Martin to just shadow him and tag along with him on Sunday, just to see what I was getting myself into and kind of how things worked before my first day on the job. But his assignment that day, about 10 blocks north of Busch Stadium, was to cover the Rams and I think it was the Arizona Cardinals in town, but I might be wrong on that. And everybody just wanted to be at that baseball game. The Rams were terrible. They ended up being 4-12 that year. And I remember that Tony Banks was their quarterback, the Rams. Superstar at Michigan State, wasn't doing a whole lot with the Rams. And he fumbles on a key play, and the crowd at the Dome bursts into a huge cheer. What just happened? Well, McGwire had just hit his 70th home run down the street, and everybody was listening or watching or keeping up on that. Nobody cared about the Rams at that point. And I remember that we then went, when we finished with the Rams in the locker room, and I'm in the locker room, and I'd done that. I'd been in the Packers locker room with Brett Favre and Reggie White and all these guys. But we're in the locker room, we're interviewing the Rams after the loss, and then we go down the street just to get a little bit of post game from the Cardinals. So I missed all of that, but I was like just close. So my first day working in St. Louis was the day after Mark McGwire hit his 70th home run. It was the day after the season ended. And I ended up covering a lot of baseball, covered 2 World Series there, covered 2 Super Bowls. It was actually the team before the greatest show on turf. It was the 99 Rams that got Marshall Faulk. Kurt Warner was born because of Trent Green, a knee injury that put him out for the year. This was supposed to be the year for the Rams because Trent Green, who was a local kid in St. Louis, was traded back from the Washington Redskins. And then in the second game of the preseason, Rodney Harrison, who you see on NBC now, knocked him out, tore up his knee. And I'm the sideline reporter, by the way. This is 99 now, the next year. I'm the sideline reporter for the local broadcast. And I have to ask Dick Vermeil walking off the field, he looks like he just lost Trent Green. What do you do? He goes, we got Kurt Warner. Well, good luck with that.
Like who?
Well, we know how that works. So they had Warner. They had acquired Marshall Faulk. They already had Isaac Bruce. They had drafted Torrey Holt, superstar wide receiver, and they went on to win the Super Bowl, which we covered in Atlanta, and then 2 years later, they were the greatest show on turf. Mike Martz is the head coach, even better than the 99 team, and they were upset in the Super Bowl in New Orleans, which I covered. I was there, by a young quarterback that was stepping in to take over the reins for New England, Tom Brady, for Drew Bledsoe.
Never heard from him after that.
No, he didn't work out very well for him.
Yeah, that Super Bowl that the Rams won against the Titans was the one where a yard short.
Yard short. Mike Jones, linebacker from the University of Missouri, so a local star with what they call the tackle. They just simply referred to it as the tackle, and it has been the case for almost all big time games that I've covered. Because I'm not announcing those games, I watched that play on a monitor in a hallway. And that's typically the way it goes, because if you want to get into the locker room when there's 500 reporters, you got to line up early. When Salvador Perez hit the walk-off hit to win the wild card in 2015 against the
A's.
Against the A's.
Yeah.
2014. Against the A's, first playoff game for the Royals in 29 years. I was sitting in the press conference room, all extra innings, just waiting for it to end because I didn't have field access because they start to limit that, unlike the regular season. I mean, I could name, I remember watching Adam Wainwright strike out Carlos Beltran to end the NLCS in the playoffs in 2006, I believe, and then watching a guy with a whole entourage around him just shaking his head in disappointment as he walked right by us. That was Donald Trump, who I don't even think was a Mets fan, but he looked like he was disgruntled at the loss. So, that's typically where I've watched all those big games, or the big ends to game. End to games is in hallways because, you got work to do.
What's the best game you've covered I have a feeling I know what it is. I think you just talked about it. Best game you've covered in person.
Yeah, I mean, that wild card game is any of those games I mentioned were pretty amazing, but that wild card game, 29 years of a playoff drought, and suddenly you feel like, and you're winning, and they make some decisions that backfired on them. They brought in a pitcher by the name of Yordano Ventura, late Yordano Ventura now, who became a good friend of mine, and young fireballing Dominican, and they brought him out of the bullpen. Trying to just get their best guys in there. He hadn't pitched out of the bullpen, and he gives up a home run to Brandon Moss, second home run of the game by Brandon Moss. And John Lester's on the hill, and how are you going to come back from, I think it was 7-3. And they started running on him. They had a game plan, and they started running and started chipping away. And that's the best game I've ever covered. But there have been unbelievable NFL games, and actually one of the most fun games I ever covered. First trip I ever went on in St. Louis, because my first year there, we had a big sports staff, and they traveled everybody but me. I was the low guy in the totem pole. And I remember I think it was the 98 and 99 season, the Blues were in the playoffs, and they were playing the Phoenix Coyotes. Like, that was Phoenix at the time, is what they called them. And I think the first two were there. So they sent, like, our top sports guy, and they came back for two. It was like 2-2, 1-1-1. So then they went back for game 5 and they sent another one of the sports guys. And then they went back for game 7. They're like, Joel, you can go. I'm like, all right. And so it was game 7 of, I think it was the first round of the playoffs. And it went 0-0 to overtime. And the Blues won 1-0 in overtime to advance. That was my first ever road trip in St. Louis. And 2 days later, they were going to play against the Dallas Stars. And they, we were already on the road. So they're like, well, just go from Phoenix to Dallas. And so then I ended up with 2 more games there. And they ended up losing in that second round to Dallas, which was the Stars team that ended up winning the Stanley Cup. And it's all crazy how this stuff comes together. But that Stars team, Brett Hull won the Stanley Cup that year, the night before I got married. I remember watching that the night before my wedding, because I still have to watch, I think it was double overtime of the Stanley Cup finals. Come on.
Yeah. That's cool. It's cool how like all these sports events are lining up.
Yeah.
So after that, you end up at Kansas City. What got you from St. Louis to Kansas City?
Better opportunity, worst team at the time, which people didn't understand. And it's like, we don't pick our job based on who's going to win the most games. Obviously you want to be in a market that has people watching. And I was going from a market in St. Louis where a lot more people are watching than in Kansas City. But, I mentioned being at the Fox affiliate in St. Louis. That was my first 6 years there. And so that was the longest I'd ever been anywhere. And then I left there and went down the street to the regional sports network. And that's where I started traveling with the Cardinals and doing a lot of stuff with the Blues. And it was all sports all the time. There were, between pregame shows and postgame shows and in-game reporting and feature things and other sports, there were 3 of us that kind of split all the duties. When the same network took over the rights to the Royals in 2008, they were only looking for one person. They don't have NHL. There's no NBA here. It was just one thing, Royals. So I lobbied hard to get that same boss, same company, but I thought that this could be my big break, and I got it right. So I went from, maybe we had a main kind of anchor or host, and then I was one of the reporters. So I went from maybe hosting 10, 15 shows a summer to hosting 300 plus here in Kansas City. So it was a no-brainer to me, and to this day, don't share it with anybody. I mean, 350 or more, we do 150 to 160 games, multiply that times 2 for a pre and a post game show. So I'm doing those every single game. And then I'm the guy down by the dugout and doing all the reports and doing all the post game interviews. So it's a really unique, I don't know that I knew at the time what that would do for a brand or what that would do for, recognition. I just knew that it was more airtime. And what I didn't understand at the time, and then the team, 6 years later wins, that as we became the number 1 rated broadcast in the country of any baseball team, that we had a lot of people here in town watching us, and that changed everything. And so, very much a part of this community, very much feel, I mentioned before, platform that I have a voice to help others and be involved with other endeavors. And so this was the greatest move. I mean, I had high expectations. It was the next step. I didn't realize that in terms of TV, that it would probably be the last step. You never know. I have zero desire to go anywhere else in TV. I'm so happy here.
When we talked the first time, you told me a pretty cool story about, talking about the platform that you have, about when you went overseas.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind sharing that story with us, I thought it was a pretty cool story you shared.
Yeah, it was 2018, I believe. I don't know why suddenly, let's see, pandemic was 20, it's either 18 or 19. I should know that. I mean, for goodness sake, I wrote about it in my book, but the years start to blend together. I was asked that year by the network and by the Royals if I would be willing to leave for a week to go on a USO tour. And of course, I immediately was like, heck yeah. But then there was a little bit of trepidation just because I'd missed one game in my whole career for a death in the family in 08. And like, this has always been my gig. I'm always here. Now they got to find somebody to replace me for a week. But I'm like, it's funny because, other people were like, is this going to be safe? And I mean, from the military, like, nobody was getting to us. Like, we couldn't have been safer. But that's like what most people would say. Like, wait a minute, you're going to the Middle East? Is that going to be okay? For me, it was like, wait a minute, I don't know about leaving this. But I didn't think too hard about it. I was just like, how often do you get an opportunity like this? So the deal was that they wanted us to go over there for September 11th and to be with the troops, and actually to be there live with the troops during a baseball game. We so often do the, this one's for you troops type of thing. And that was always a thrill. We would do it, if not every year, every other year when the team was home. And, they would have us synced in via satellite with some troops, usually somewhere in the Middle East, usually Kuwait. And then they would gather up, and it was all units from the Missouri area. So they would gather up some of the spouses and family members and get them tickets to the game, and they'd put them up in the upper deck, and they'd send me up to the upper deck, and I'd interview like the wife or the kid, and then they'd have the spouse on satellite, in Kuwait. Always heartwarming, all these great stories. And we would interview all the troops during the pregame show, and they'd be like, oh, they're from here. They even know who we are. This is cool. Like, they're watching us. So I always kind of thought, man, how cool is it that, like, we have people serving our country overseas that the highlight of their day is watching us. Like, that's pretty big deal. And that goes well beyond baseball. I just remember at one point getting a tweet from a soldier, and I don't know if I'm exaggerating what happened or not. In my mind, this is the way it was. That was basically something like, hey, watched you guys on the American Forces Network last night. What an amazing game. And I'm like, they lost 13-0 and the game went 12 innings. What was amazing about that? Because it was a brutal game. And it was like, it didn't matter. They got a piece of home. So that always resonated with me. So when they said, you want to go over, I'm like, heck yeah, I want to go. And so for the first time in my life, I wasn't on the TV side. I mean, I was broadcasting. I was there with them. And so here we are on September 11th. They sent George Brett, Hall of Famer, Mike Sweeney, Reggie Sanders, Brett Saberhagen, all former Royals, and me and some staff. And we hung out for a Royals White Sox game on September 11th, which, was actually September 12th at 3 a.m. there. And 200 servicemen and women got up in the middle of the night to watch this damn game and hang out with us. And they served no drinks, not in Kuwait, but they served, maybe hot dogs and popcorn and cotton candy and Cracker Jacks and things like that, soft drinks, waters. And it was just like the coolest, most, like the warmest. I'm not talking about the temperature there, which is brutal, but like just tight knit, amazing, patriotic, heartwarming thing ever. I still talk to some of those service members. I wrote about a couple of them in my book. And when we wrapped up at the end of the game, Royals won, thinned out a little bit. That game ended at 6:13 in the morning. Again, I typically don't know when games end, but I remember that. I think it was 6:13 in the morning. And we went outside where it was shockingly light out. The USO building didn't have any windows. I'm like, wait, it's light out. And Iraq is like 15 miles down the way there. And, I've not by design become known as the guy that oftentimes gets the Gatorade bucket. Our star catcher, Salvador Perez, they call it the Salvi Splash here in Kansas City. I'm always doing the post-game interview. He dumps the bucket on the guest. Sometimes it's on me too. Sometimes I'm just the target. So I'm always known for that. And so we thought it's 6-something in the morning, and the PR guy for the Royals sends a text message to my producer saying, hey, what if all the troops just dumped a Gatorade bucket on Joel after the game,
nice.
On TV? And I'm like, we're jet lagged. We had gotten in the day before. We have a 2-hour drive back, Camp Buring in Kuwait. We have a 2-hour drive back. That's going to get us back like 9 a.m. To Kuwait City. I got to get on this little bus we had. How about we dump it on a soldier? I said, okay. So we brought a soldier out there, and I did a post-game interview with that soldier a guy by the name of Nick Lede, Sergeant Nick Lede, and then Brett Saberhagen and Mike Sweeney snuck up behind him and they dumped a Gatorade bucket over Nick. And that's what they ran as our start of the game back in Kansas City, at 10:30 at night. And I don't think his mom could have been any happier watching that back at home, and his wife, and just the coolest experience. Then we went to 2 other bases the next few days and got to visit more troops that weren't Kansas City based. It's the coolest thing I've ever done in my career, hands down. Better than any game, better than any wild card, World Series, whatever it is. Hands down, the coolest thing. I hope I get another opportunity to do it.
I was like, him and his family will never forget that. Ever. He'll remember that.
And we're friends now too. As a matter of fact, his, months after that, he had sent me a message saying, "Hey, my wife and baby are coming into Kansas City. They lived Topeka, or maybe they weren't even in Topeka back then, but at least an hour away or whatever. And they're coming in to see her, mom and stepdad, or stepdad, I don't remember who. Would you be willing to just meet them for dinner?" I'm like, "Yeah." I mean, I wouldn't usually just meet someone random like that, but yeah. And so my wife and I took them out to dinner, and we FaceTimed with him in Kuwait. I think he was in Iraq at that point, all bundled up. I guess it actually does become a cold season at some point, because when I was there, it was 115 degrees. And we're friends to this day. I mean, we keep in touch now, and it's a pretty cool thing.
It's really cool. That's really cool. And last thing I really want to talk about, career wise, was the World Series, covering the World Series champs. The 15 team got really close, Game 7, or excuse me, was that 14?
14.
15.
14
yep,
team got
15
close,
is when they won it. Yep.
Yep.
What was that like?
Amazing, and in a lot of different ways. There are only 2 bad parts about this job. One is the time away from family. That's the worst part. Either you figure that out or you don't. I'm thankful that my family has. They make all the sacrifice. The second part is that you're still as much a sports fan as ever, but it's in a different way. It's in a business way. So I am programmed, after all of years of doing this, a loss is a loss, move on. The 14 Game 7 loss hurt, but I got great advice early on here from Royals all-time wins leader Paul Splittorff, who was a broadcast partner of mine before he passed away from cancer in 2011, and he said to me in 2008, he saw I was getting pissed off at all the losses, because you want to be a fan, you like these guys, you get to know them, you get to know their families and travel with them. And he said, there are a lot of important people that are paid a lot of money to lose sleep at night over these losses, and you're not one of them. And it took me a while not too long, but it took me a little bit to understand that what he meant was, you got a job to do, win or lose. You have to have energy on that post-game show. And yes, it's much easier talking about winning. It's much easier being upbeat during a 7-game winning streak than a 7-game losing streak when everything feels like Groundhog Day. But I learned at that point, that was really the moment, and there'd been a buildup to it, that this became business. So I don't enjoy the wins the way a fan does. I like them.
Yeah.
Life's always better when you're winning. I don't get upset over the losses. I don't like them, but I can handle them. 2015 to me, and 14 too, was sort of where we just let our guard down. Me and my colleagues, we weren't broadcasting the games because it's all national at that point. So the 4 of us, the 2 that are in the booth, and my broadcast partner and I for pre and post game show, we had no pregame show to do, but we always did a post game, even if it wasn't on our network. That's the only responsibility we had. So, less being in the locker rooms and still doing interviews, just got a chance to enjoy it as a fan. And, the only time I've never traveled with this team was 2014 World Series against San Francisco, because there was no real logistic place for us to set up to do the show. So they had us stationed downtown Kansas City at what's called the Power and Light District, which, whenever you see like those World Cup, those outdoor parties and all that, like that's that area in Kansas City where they could fit 10,000 people in there outdoors, and big screens and bars, and it's a big party. And there's a big stage for your music acts and things like that. So they had us up there doing the show. And then they said, that worked so well, 2015 playoffs, you're not traveling, me and one of my partners, Rex Hudler. And so we watched I mean, as cool as it would have been to be at Citi Field in New York, he and I sat on a stage in front of 10,000 people that many of whom had never seen the Royals win a championship in their lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it had been 30 years or maybe they were 2 years old, you know, a lot of 20 somethings and early 30 somethings in that crowd. And we're on a stage with what looked like, you know, the greatest New Year's Eve party ever, watching everybody go crazy. And then I think we must have done like a 2-hour post-game show. Me and Rex Hudler, and we brought in Mike McFarland, a former catcher too. And then Jeff Montgomery, my usual partner, was in New York doing a lot of the interviews. Just one of the coolest euphoric moments ever. And then a couple of days later, we did a parade, like I think maybe 3 hours of parade coverage. I had zero voice left at that point. And we combined with the local Fox affiliate. So we did like 3 hours of parade coverage with helicopters and this and that. And I have laryngitis at this point. I got nothing left. I could barely get anything out. And I said, is there a way for me to have a different role? They're like, nope, it's your deal. You're the traffic cop here. So, you know, it was me and like, I don't know if we had a dozen other reporters from the other network and my guys, and you're wedged into what was, you know, 800,000 people downtown. There's nowhere to go for a bathroom because you're never going to get there. And the limited commercial breaks, if there were any, like, what are you going to do? The only thing I could do is drink water. But if you're going to do that, you got to go to the bathroom. So basically, anytime I was off camera, it was lozenge, like for 3 hours long, and we got through it. And I don't think anybody will remember that I had no voice, but it was truly one of the most remarkable stretches of just excitement. And I'll wrap up the thought with this. I watched that whole experience and the 2 years of that totally transform the city. It put Kansas City on the map. Whenever I went anywhere around the country, if I was wearing anything Kansas City, oh, the Royals, nobody ever did that before. And there was a pride here in the city, which still exists. And it wasn't just those 2 years. It kept going and going and going. And then the Chiefs now have helped that, and the Royals are starting to come back. That people love being Kansas City, and people are so proud of this place now. And it was pretty awesome to be a small part of that.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's funny you say that because I've met, being in the military, you meet every fan base out there. And I remember years back, I was meeting Chiefs fans and Royals fans and super passionate about it. You brought up something good too, not taking the losses personal. That's something I've learned to. My dad used to watch North Carolina basketball and drive himself crazy. And I remember the game with Villanova where they hit the winning shot. I was like, no, that sucks. So I've been trying to talk myself into that. So now, last couple of things I want to talk about. Tell us about your book.
So, almost 4 years ago, you know, I'd never done anything but this stuff, and a buddy of mine caught up with me in the off season, and he says, you know, what have you been up to? And I said, I don't know. I'm in just calling the high school game here and this there, and I don't do a whole lot in the off season. And I wanted to do more. And I said, I had a couple groups hire me to speak to their organizations, nothing much. And he said, you know, you could start a speaking business. And I said, I could do what? He said, you can start a speaking business. He goes, all the experience you have around leadership and, you know, teamwork and culture, he's like, you can. And his wife was a speaker too. And so she kind of guided me on that. And everybody, including her, said, if you're going to be a speaker, you have to write a book. So she introduced me to an author, and I thought, okay, this woman's going to write my book, because I don't know what the hell I'm writing about. And I mean, I don't think they're talking about write a book about the Royals or write a book about broadcasting if I'm going to speak about leadership. And so I meet with this author, and she looks me straight in the eye and she goes, you're not ready to write a book. And I would have been incredibly insulted if not for the fact that I agreed with her. And so she said, start a podcast instead. I said, why? She said, well, one, you already know how to interview people. It's what you do for a living. Two, you'll meet people. It's a good networking opportunity. Three, you'll increase your brand. If you do something beyond baseball, you'll build a reputation then with that. And four, you'll create content, you know, for speeches for maybe a book down the road. And sure enough, that happened. Along the way, so the podcast is called Rounding the Bases, but it's rare that I have a sports guest every now and then. But along the way, pretty early on, I thought, and the podcast is about culture, leadership, teamwork, all that type of stuff. I thought if I ask every guest 3 baseball themed questions, what's the biggest home run you've hit professionally in your business? What's the biggest swing and miss you've taken, and what did you learn from it? And what is small ball? What are the little things that add up to the big things? And that was, I just was trying to be a little cutesy, but not too overly cheesy. I don't like a lot of cheese. Yeah. And the answer that had the most interesting, or the question that had the most interesting answers was the small ball question. And then it kind of dawned on me a couple of years ago. I'm like, I think I can write a book about small ball, the little things that add up to the big things. And so I spent, a good chunk of 2020 working on it and writing it. And then I thought, and I've been speaking for 3 years and speaking to every type of group imaginable, from military to education to healthcare to legal field. I mean, insurance, you name it. And I was missing the book, but the content was building. And suddenly I had more stories. They weren't all Royals stories. They weren't all baseball stories. It was stories about entrepreneurship. It was stories about CEOs and leadership. And so I thought, all right, I'm going to write about small ball. And then the idea dawned on me somewhat late in the process, as I was trying to figure out what went where and what stories to tell. And do I tell a baseball story, a business story? Do I mix them all together? How does it work? And that's when I thought, I'm going to write this book like a baseball game. So every chapter is going to be an inning, and every inning is going to be a topic. So small ball topics, anything from building trust to paying attention to detail, to taking care of others, to reading people. How do you read people? For me, when I walk in a locker room, how do I know when the right time and the wrong time is to approach someone? And then I thought, well, if I'm doing every chapter as an inning, isn't there a top and a bottom half? So one half of every chapter will be a baseball story. One half of every chapter will be a business story, and they'll both be tied together to one theme. And then you move on to the next chapter and the next chapter. And it's everything from, it's mostly, not all Royals, a lot of Royals. Every baseball story is written with the intent of someone that could care less about baseball learning from it. It's as much life lessons, I believe, as it is leadership. It's much less about baseball. If there's, say, a chapter about a Royal by the name of Whit Merrifield, it's about never giving up, because he was on the cusp of saying, you know what, I don't think I'm going to make it to the big leagues. And oh, by the way, about 30 years before, that's exactly what happened to his dad, who was knocking on the door of making it to the big leagues, got hurt, gave up, and never made it. And now Whit Merrifield goes on and makes it after thinking about quitting, and gets this advice from his dad about, just before you hang it up, make sure you know you're done. And he ends up being the major league hits leader in back-to-back years, only the second right-hander in the history of Major League Baseball to lead the league in hits, or to lead the majors in hits in back-to-back years. The other was Kirby Puckett. So the book's chock full of stories like that, and then it's chock full of stories of either a big-time CEO or the founder of a cool startup that happened to serve in the military as a U.S. Army Ranger, and what happened there. So it was, stressful to write, having never written one before, but I'm thrilled with how it turned out, and people seem to be enjoying it. And I tried to make it a simple read. There's enough heavy stuff out there. I wanted it to be simple, easy, in this low attention span society that we have now, including myself.
Well, we're going to have the link for that. Also, the link for your podcast, Rounding the Bases. Folks, I'm telling you, he has had some phenomenal guests. He's had Simon Sinek. You've had a lot of locals from Kansas City on there. Just who's who of guests have been on there. It's really good stuff. So definitely check out both of those. Last 2 questions for you. How ready are you for baseball to get back to being normal and post-COVID?
I'm ready. It's funny because the older I get, in my early years in Kansas City, it's like by November I was itching for baseball, and then it'd be December, and then January, especially as we started going into the playoffs, where you're just tired. And that's not a complaint. Greatest job, as I've said, but I feel like it's been so long since we've had normalcy.
Yeah.
And but I'll say at the same time, Trip, that I've had more time at home with my family. I think you're probably sick of me at this point, but we didn't travel last year. We lost out on 4 months. There's a whole story of resiliency there. I mean, we get paid by the game, most of us. So, it was 2/3 of the baseball salary gone. I don't say that for people to feel sorry about me. There are a lot of people that have it a lot worse. And I'm fortunate enough that I have this other business with speaking that I was able to survive. But I think like everybody else, I'm ready to have some normalcy back. And, I think kind of back to what we've been talking about, that one of the things that hurt last year, put aside the paycheck, we didn't have the ability to entertain people.
Mm-hmm.
And when we as Americans, and I think it's probably true around the world, when we're struggling, what do? We turn to a diversion. We turn to something to take our minds off of it.
Distraction.
A distraction. And we didn't have that last year. Remember that stretch in April, May, June, where there were like no sports going on?
And when they were trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, we were watching, Korean League baseball, and that was a treat to have something. And so I very much understood when we came back, even though oftentimes we were doing games from an empty stadium at home when the team was on the road, pitch black, and we're in suites and broadcast rooms just doing the game off of monitors or doing the pregame show. And to get back was such a privilege and so uplifting, and people felt it. I heard from people. So to be able to get that back and to actually have fans back in the stands, I don't know what that looks like to start the season, but it seems, as we're recording this right now, that we're going to start the season, it sounds like, and have a full season on time. I don't know if we'll have fans from the get-go, but we'll have fans at some point. I think we'll build back into it. So I'm excited about that. I really am. I mean, I'm excited for everyone to be able to get it.
Yeah. One of my big things is traveling to all the different ballparks. And there was a lot of ballparks in this area, like Kansas City, St. Louis, the Braves' new stadium, that when I was in Germany for 6 years, I was like, I cannot wait to get back to the States and start traveling. I get back, COVID. So I'm ready for it as well.
Yeah, it's coming soon. Well, whenever you get somewhere where the Royals are at, you'll let me know, and I'll take care of the rest.
Oh, I'll definitely take you up on that. And then finally, what is the one thing, this incredible journey that you've had with your career and your life, biggest thing you've learned about yourself?
A little bit of it, but I'll see if I can come up with something else too, because I don't want to be repetitive. I mean, a lot of it is just the fact that I have a bigger voice and have the ability to make a greater impact on people's lives than I realized. I never knew that. And that sometimes, by the way, can just be saying hi to someone when you're walking from point A to point B at the stadium. And, my family and friends will give me crap about, can I have your autograph? And people want autographs and want to could I take a picture? But it means something to people. And, I did learn early on, when even in my early years, where somebody would come up and want an autograph before I was even here, some kid would want an autograph, and I'd say, well, this is not worth anything. I mean, I'm going to devalue the baseball. And I came to learn that that's not the answer they want. They want the autograph. So I think one of the things that I've learned is that I actually have this amazing opportunity to make someone's day better every day. So I've learned that about myself. I mean, I knew that I knew how to treat people right, but I just understood that, like, I don't think I'm a big deal. I really don't. And I think that's important too, to stay humble. But if people view you as something else, and you can not play along, but if you can help them with, making their day better or whatever it is, then, maybe that is the way you are. Maybe they are seeing you as something, some bit of hope or something like that. So I think that's the one thing. And I guess the other would just be the fact that the thing I've learned about myself is just always keep pushing forward. Like, even I go back to talking about that guidance counselor telling me I couldn't go to Illinois, and every door was shut on me before I got into TV, but I just didn't want to say no. It was my dream. And so I think the biggest thing I've learned from that day all the way to now is that there's even during this pandemic, like, you can't stand still. You have to keep pushing forward, even if you're happy. And I am, and I love where I'm at with the Royals. Like, what else can I do? How else can I keep evolving? How else can I keep doing the things that enable me to have that platform and make a difference? So I think that's really it, is just understanding that I don't think I'm a big deal, but that I have the ability to be a big deal to others. And if that does some good in the world, then, hey, let's do it.
Well, sir, I can't thank you enough for taking time to be here on our podcast. Like I said, we're going to have his book. We're going to have his podcast link on this description as well. So definitely go over there, check out his book, check out the podcast. It's some incredible stuff he's got over there. Thank you, sir. What final words you have for our listeners?
I think the final words I would have for our listeners is just, we're in such a tumultuous time right now, between the virus, between racial tension, between political unrest. And, this is so simplistic, but I guess it's not. Just try to be good to each other. I mean, I know that sounds so hokey, but I think I suspect very fortunate to have been in the military, where you're exposed to all walks of life. I think that's one of the beauties of the military, very much like a locker room or a clubhouse in sports. So I've been fortunate enough to have that too, whether it be covering, high school basketball in the inner city, and then going the next day to the richest neighborhoods and understanding that people are people. Like when the protests, riots, whatever happened in Ferguson, and people are labeling and stereotyping, and I'm like, I've been in those neighborhoods, I've been in those gyms, I've met these people, and the people in that community are just as good as the people in the next community. And so I feel, I feel lucky, and maybe you feel the same way, Trip, too, that I have been exposed to all walks of life, and I'm better because of it. And that I have been lucky enough to not only know my way. And so I would just say to everyone and challenge everybody, like, try to get to know people better. Try to ask instead of pointing fingers. Ask why. Ask what's going on, and listen. That's what I'd leave people with, is like, one, dream big, keep pushing forward, don't stand still, and two, just treat people well. We all could do that better.
Yeah, simple message. Just treat people well.
Treat people well.
Well, sir, thank you very much for this opportunity. This was awesome for me. The selfish side, the sports side of me, this was really cool. And folks, stay tuned next week for another episode of the Shadows Podcast.